Hello, and thank you for joining me here at Problem Solving Math. Today we're going to talk about ratios. This is an example of a ratio, the number of smileys to the number of hearts you see here. Take a minute to remember how many of each there are. First, let's define a ratio. A ratio is a blank of blank or more numbers. A ratio is a comparison of two or more numbers. We need to have at least two numbers to compare. Today, we're going to be talking about comparing two numbers. The two things that we will be comparing are smileys and hearts. There are three ways to write a ratio. Let's try it now. First, with words. 6 smiles to 3 hearts. And the word 2 tells us we're dealing with a ratio. The second way is with a symbol, a colon, as you see in both the visual and in written form. 6 smiles, we read this as 2, but it's a colon, 3 hearts. The third way to write a ratio is as a fraction. 6 smiles over 3 hearts. Now, it's very important to remember to include units so we know which items we're talking about. This is an example of a part-to-part ratio because we're comparing two parts of the full total number of items. In this case, if we wanted to compare it to the whole number of items, we would have to add our smiles and hearts. 6 smiles plus 3 hearts makes 9 total items, which would be the whole. Now, many times you may be asked to simplify a ratio. We do this by first finding a common factor. See which factor both items have in common. If you're asked to put it in simplest form, you'll need to use the GCF, or greatest common factor. That is the number that will go into both items, the largest number that will go into both items. Then we reduce all parts by that factor. We do this by dividing. In this case, reduce doesn't mean subtracting because we want it to be even. So we're going to divide. Let's try it with our example. 6 smiles to 3 hearts is the original ratio. We're going to simplify it using the GCF. What's the GCF of 6 and 3? Take a minute. You're right, it's 3. Since the GCF is 3, we're going to divide by 3. Now we're going to divide both items by 3. When we do that, we find that we have 2 smiles to 1 heart. 6 smiles divided by 3 is 2. 3 hearts divided by 3 is 1 heart. Let's show this visually. We have our original ratio. 6 smiles to 3 hearts. When we divide this by the greatest common factor, we're going to be grouping those. So when we have 3 groups, we have 2 smileys in each group and 1 heart in each group, which means we have 2 smiles in each group, 1 heart in each group, and that is our simplified ratio, 2 smiles to 1 heart. Another way that we can show this is by scaling down. When we have this, we have the original ratio, and we have what we are scaling it down by on each side of the arrow. I like to remember scale down. Down starts with a D, and so does divide. So when we're scaling down, we're dividing. Now, we need to remember what we do to one side, we must do to the other. It has to be even. So in this case, we divide both sides by 3, and we have 2 smiles to 1 heart. Don't forget, what you do to one side must be done to the other. If we scale down, I wonder if we can scale up. We can. And a way to remember this is scale up the U is the first vowel in multiply. So scale down, divide, scale up, multiply. In this case, we're going to scale up by a factor of 5, which just means we're multiplying both sides of the ratio by 5. 6 smiles times 5 gives us 30 smiles, and 3 hearts times 5 gives us 15 hearts. Take a minute and find out what the total number of items would be if we wanted to do a part-to-whole ratio. 45 items. Don't forget, what you do to one side must be done to the other. All right, here's our first problem-solving problem. If we have the same original ratio, which means for every 6 smiles we have 3 hearts. We're going to problem solve and find out how many hearts we would need if we have 24 smiles. First thing to figure out is, are we scaling up or down? Well, to go from 6 smiles to 24 smiles, we have to scale up. So we know that we'll be multiplying. Now determine what factor we'll be multiplying by. 6 times what equals 24? That's right, 4. Now, what we do to one side must be done to the other. So if we multiplied 6 times 4 to get 24, we'll have to do the same thing. And 3 times 4 gives us 12 hearts. All right, let's try it with the other side. Remember, for every 6 smiles, we have 3 hearts. So how do we go from 3 hearts to 27 hearts? Are we scaling up or down? We're scaling up, which means we'll be multiplying. How do we find what we're multiplying by? Well, we have to ask ourselves, 3 hearts times what gives us 27 hearts? That's right, 9. If we multiply one side by 9, we must multiply the other side by 9 to keep it even. 6 smiles times 9 gives us 54 smiles. Remember, what you do to one side must be done to the other. Okay, here's our first two-step problem. We have the same ratio. For every 6 smiles, we have 3 hearts. But we want to know how many smiles we'll have if we're given 7 hearts. Can you easily scale from 3 hearts to 7 hearts? I can't do that mentally. Well, first, let's reduce it. So let's scale down our original ratio to put it in simplest form. When we scale down, we divide. And since we're putting it in simplest form, we're going to use the GCF, which is 3. What we do to one side, we must do to the other, so we do to both sides. 6 smiles divided by 3 gives us 2 smiles, and 3 hearts divided by 3 gives us 1 heart. Now we can see, from 1 heart to 7 hearts, we'll be scaling up, which means we're multiplying. How do we go from 1 heart to 7 hearts? Well, we multiply by 7. What we do to one side must be done to the other. So we multiply 2 smiles times 7 to get 14 smiles. So for every 6 smiles we have, we're given 3 hearts. For every 2 smiles we have 1 heart. And for every 14 smiles, we have 7 hearts. All of these are called equivalent ratios. They're the equivalent ratio to one another. Here's a visual representation of the problem we just solved. 6 smiles to 3 hearts. We divide that by 3, the greatest common factor. And when we put those in 3 different groups, we find we have 2 smileys and 1 heart in each group. So first we scale down, now we scale up. We multiply. In this case, we multiply by 7. So we're taking our group of 2 smileys and we're repeating that 7 times. When we repeat that 7 times, we're given 14 smileys. And when we do that with 1 heart, multiplied 7 times, we get 7 hearts. Sounds easy enough, right? Now it's your turn. You're going to write this ratio 3 ways. We're comparing green squares to yellow moons. Grab your paper or your dry erase board and write the ratio 3 ways. Remember, the first way is words, the second way uses a colon, and the third way is a fraction. Pause the video if you need to. All right, the first way is using the word 2. Let's see how you did. 4 squares to 6 moons. Great job. Second way is using a colon. 4 squares with a colon to 6 moons. Third way is as a fraction. 4 squares over 6 moons. Did you remember to label your units? Now we're going to simplify this ratio. So we're going to find the GCF. What number goes into both 4 and 6? We know they're both even, so the first thing we should try is dividing by 2. When we do that, in this case, we have the GCF. Divide by 2. Now, to reduce this, we're going to divide both parts by 2. 4 squares and 6 moons divided by 2. We divide both the top and bottom, both the numerator and denominator of this part-to-part ratio by 2 to get 2 squares to 3 moons as our simplified ratio. Now let's problem solve. For every 4 squares, we have 6 moons. How many moons will we have if we're given 4 squares? First, determine if we're scaling up or down. Because the number gets larger, we're scaling up. And when we scale up, we're multiplying. Now figure out, what do we need to multiply by 4 to get 12? 3. What we do to one side, we must do to the other. So when we multiply both parts by 3, we have 4 times 3 is 12 squares, and 6 moons times 3 is 18 moons. Did you get it right? Great job. Next, asks us how many squares if there are 27 moons. Is there an easy way to go from 6 moons to 27 moons? I don't think so. So we're going to use the 2-step process we did earlier. First, by simplifying our ratio using the GCF, which means we're dividing both parts by 2 in this case. When we divide both parts by 2, we're given the simplified ratio, 2 squares to 3 moons. Now we're going to use that simplified ratio to scale up to get 27 moons. So we know we're scaling up because the number gets larger, and we need to find out 3 moons times what gives us 27 moons. Well, 3 times what is 27? 9. What we do to one, we must do to the other. So 2 squares times 9 gives us 18 squares. How'd you do? Please leave a comment or send me a message through my website if you have any further questions. Thanks for watching, and you can find Problem Solving Math at our website, problemsolvingmath.com, or at Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest, Teachers Pay Teachers, or with the direct contact link. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe.